I never imagined that Christmas Eve would become the night I signed away my marriage. My hands trembled as I picked up the pen, staring at the divorce papers Xander had thrown across the marble coffee table. The document sat there like a death sentence, crisp and fine. Outside, snow fell gently against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our mansion, creating a scene that should have been romantic but instead felt suffocating. "Sign it, Ash. There's nothing left between us." Xander's voice cut through the silence like a blade dipped in ice. He stood by the fireplace, his back to me, broad shoulders rigid with tension. The man I had fallen in love with 3 years ago now felt like a stranger wearing a familiar face. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to ask when exactly his love for me had died. But the words caught in my throat, tangled with all the things I couldn't say. My hand moved to my stomach instinctively, a protective gesture I'd developed over the past month. 4 weeks. That's how long I'd known about the baby growing inside me. 4 weeks of secret doctor visits, of hiding morning sickness, of debating whether to tell the man who was now demanding I disappear from his life. The irony wasn't lost on me. I carried his child, a piece of him that would exist long after this marriage ended. And he had no idea. I'd planned to tell him tonight, actually. Before he'd walked in with those papers, before he'd looked at me with eyes so cold they burned. I'd imagined his reaction 100 times: surprise, joy, maybe even tears. Instead, I got this: dissolution, termination, the legal ending of everything we'd built together. The baby kicked slightly, so small and fragile, as if sensing my distress. "I thought you loved me," I whispered, not looking up from the papers. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. Not in front of him, not when he clearly wanted this so badly. Xander finally turned to face me, and for a moment, just a fleeting second, I thought I saw something crack in his expression. But it hardened again just as quickly. "Love isn't always enough, Ash. We want different things. This was a mistake, a mistake." 3 years of marriage reduced to a single word. I thought about our wedding day, how he'd cried when I walked down the aisle. I thought about lazy Sunday mornings tangled in sheets, about the way he'd hold me during thunderstorms because I was afraid of lightning, about the promises we'd made under the stars during our honeymoon in Santorini. All of it. My hand hovered over the signature line. Part of me wanted to tell him about the baby right then, to use it as ammunition, to make him stay, but I'd seen couples trapped by obligation, parents who resented each other while their children absorbed every bit of that toxicity. I didn't want that for my child. If Xander was going to be in our lives, it had to be because he chose us, not because biology forced his hand. I signed my name, each letter feeling like a small death. The pen scratched against paper, and with each stroke I felt pieces of my heart crumble. When I finished, I carefully placed the pen down and slid the papers across the table toward him. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? He'd made his choice, and now I had to live with mine. Xander grabbed the papers without looking at me and walked out of the drawing room. I heard his footsteps echo through the hallway, heard his study door close with a finality that made my chest ache. I stood there in the middle of our living room. No, his living room now, surrounded by the life we'd built. Christmas decorations sparkled mockingly around me. The tree we'd decorated together just last week stood in the corner, covered in ornaments that told the story of our relationship. Each one a memory, each one now meaningless. I pressed my hand against my stomach again. "I'm sorry, baby," I murmured. "Your father will never know you exist." The words tasted bitter, but they felt necessary. This secret was mine to keep, mine to protect. I wouldn't let my child become a bargaining chip or a source of guilt. Moving mechanically, I went upstairs to what used to be our bedroom. Every surface held memories. The dresser where Xander would leave me love notes. The reading chair where we'd spent countless evenings with books and wine. The bed where we'd made this baby I now carried alone. I pulled out a duffel bag from the closet and began packing essentials. Clothes, toiletries, the small amount of money I'd saved in a separate account that Xander didn't know about. I'd opened it months ago when I first sensed him pulling away, some instinct telling me to prepare for disaster. At the bottom of my drawer, I found a photo from our first date. We looked so young, so happy, so impossibly naive. Xander's smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way it hadn't in months. I stared at that photo, debating whether to take it or leave it behind as a relic of a past that no longer existed. Sentiment 1. I tucked it into the front pocket of my bag. Stupid, maybe, but I couldn't let go completely. Not yet. When my bag was packed, I took one last look around the room. The California king bed with its expensive sheets, the walk-in closet full of designer clothes Xander had bought me, the ensuite bathroom with the soaking tub where I'd spent hours trying to relax away the stress of a failing marriage. None of it mattered. None of it was worth staying for. I walked downstairs slowly, each step an effort. Through the study door, I could see light still glowing. Xander was in there, probably already filing the papers, erasing me from his life with the same efficiency he applied to his business deals. Part of me hoped he'd hear me leaving, that he'd rush out and stop me, that he'd realize this was all a terrible mistake. But the door stayed closed and I kept walking. At the front entrance, I paused with my hand on the doorknob. Behind me lay everything I'd known for 3 years: security, comfort, love, or at least the memory of it. Ahead lay uncertainty, struggle, single parenthood, and a future I couldn't predict. I looked back one final time. The mansion glittered with Christmas lights, picture perfect from the outside, completely hollow within. I pulled my coat tighter around myself and stepped out into the December night. Snow crunched under my feet as I walked down the long driveway, past the fountain that had frozen over, past the gates that clicked shut behind me with automated precision. The cold bit through my clothes, but I barely felt it. I was numb, operating on autopilot, focused only on putting one foot in front of the other. I had one place to go, one person who wouldn't ask questions until I was ready to answer them. Walker lived downtown in a cramped apartment that was the complete opposite of the mansion I'd just left. But it would be safe, it would be warm, and most importantly, it would be mine, at least for tonight. As I trudged through the snow-covered streets, my phone buzzed in my pocket. For a moment hope flared. Maybe Xander had noticed I was gone, but it was just a weather alert warning of the incoming storm. I silenced it and kept walking, one hand protectively over my stomach, heading toward whatever came next in this shattered life I now had to rebuild from scratch. By the time I reached Walker's apartment building, my feet were numb and my face burned from the wind. It was 3 in the morning and the streets were deserted except for the occasional taxi passing by, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. I stood outside his door, suddenly hesitant. Was I really going to drag my best friend into this mess? Did I have any other choice? I knocked softly at first, then harder when there was no response. Finally, I heard shuffling inside and the door cracked open. Walker stood there in flannel pajama pants and a worn college t-shirt, his dark hair sticking up in every direction. His brown eyes widened when he saw me standing there, snow-covered and shivering. "Ash, what the hell?" He pulled me inside immediately, not waiting for an explanation. His apartment was exactly as I remembered. Small, cluttered with books and vinyl records, but somehow infinitely cozier than the mansion I'd left behind. He guided me to his ratty couch and disappeared into his room, returning moments later with a thick blanket that he wrapped around my shoulders. I sat there, staring at the cheap coffee table, unable to form words. Everything that had happened in the last few hours felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Walker didn't push. He went to his tiny kitchen and made tea, the familiar ritual giving me time to collect myself. When he finally sat down beside me, handing me a steaming mug, he simply waited. "It's over." The words came out barely above a whisper. "Xander and I, we're divorced. Or we will be. Officially in a few weeks." Saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. My hands shook around the warm mug, and before I could stop them, tears began streaming down my face. Not delicate, pretty crying, the ugly kind, with gasping breaths and trembling shoulders. Walker pulled me against his chest, letting me soak his t-shirt with tears and probably snot. He didn't say the usual platitudes people offer during breakups. He just held on, one hand rubbing my back in slow circles, waiting for the storm to pass. When I finally pulled away, embarrassed and exhausted, he handed me a box of tissues without comment. "Tell me what happened," he said gently. "From the beginning." So I did. I told him about the growing distance between Xander and me over the past 6 months. The way conversations had become stilted and formal, The way we'd started sleeping on opposite sides of the bed without touching. I told him about tonight, about the divorce papers, about the cold finality in Xander's voice. And then, because I couldn't hold it in any longer, I told him the part I hadn't told anyone else. I'm pregnant, Walker. Almost 5 weeks now. I watched his face carefully, waiting for judgment or shock or pity. Instead, his expression softened with something that looked like protective anger. Does Zander know? His voice was tight, controlled, like he was holding back stronger emotions. I shook my head. He doesn't, and he's not going to. I can't trap him with a baby, Walker. If he doesn't want me, then he sure as hell doesn't want to be tied to me through a child for the rest of his life. I won't do that to any of us. Walker was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then he squeezed my hand. You can stay here as long as you need. The apartment's small, but we'll make it work. You shouldn't be alone right now. Especially not. He gestured vaguely toward my stomach. You need someone looking out for you. Relief flooded through me so intensely it brought fresh tears. Thank you, I managed. I promise I'll figure something out soon. I just need time. Stop, Walker interrupted. You're not a burden, Ash. You're my best friend, and I'm not letting you go through this alone. We'll figure it out together, okay? The next morning arrived too quickly. I woke up on Walker's couch, disoriented and achy from sleeping in a cramped position. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painfully bright against the white snow outside. For a blessed moment I forgot everything that had happened. Then reality crashed back, and the weight of my situation settled over me like a heavy blanket. Walker was already up, making breakfast in his tiny kitchen. The smell of eggs made my stomach turn. Morning sickness right on schedule. I barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up, gripping the sides of the toilet bowl and trying to be quiet about it. When I emerged pale and shaky, Walker had a glass of water and some crackers waiting for me. You okay? He asked, concern written all over his face. This is going to be fun for the next few months, I said weakly, attempting humor to lighten the mood. Hope you don't mind bathroom concerts every morning. We ate in companionable silence, and then reality set in. I needed a job. I needed income. I needed to start building a life that didn't depend on Xander's wealth or Walker's charity. After breakfast, I borrowed Walker's laptop and started searching for employment opportunities. My degree was in English literature, which turned out to be worth approximately nothing in the practical job market. Over the next 2 weeks, I applied to dozens of positions: coffee shops, bookstores, retail stores, administrative assistant roles, anything that might hire me. I went to interviews trying to hide my growing stomach under baggy clothes, answering questions about my availability with carefully worded responses that didn't mention impending parenthood. Every single place rejected me. Some were honest enough to explain that they needed someone who could commit long-term, and a pregnant employee meant maternity leave complications. Others just said they'd gone in a different direction or found a candidate who better fit their needs. The rejections stung, each one another reminder of how precarious my situation had become. I'd gone from having everything to having nothing in the span of a few weeks. Walker never complained about my extended stay, but I felt guilty anyway. His apartment wasn't meant for 2 people, and I was disrupting his life whether he admitted it or not. Eventually I found freelance work online. Content writing, data entry, virtual assistant tasks. Nothing glamorous and certainly nothing that paid well. But it was something. I worked late into the nights, trying to build up a small savings account. Every dollar counted now. I had to buy prenatal vitamins, pay for clinic visits, save for baby supplies. The numbers were overwhelming when I let myself think about them too long. My first prenatal appointment at the community clinic was eye-opening. The waiting room was crowded with other people in difficult situations. Teenagers, women with multiple children already. People who looked as tired and overwhelmed as I felt. I waited for 2 hours before seeing a doctor, a kind older woman who confirmed what I already knew. I was pregnant, approximately 7 weeks along, and everything looked normal so far. You're doing this alone? She asked gently, noting the absence of a partner in my paperwork. Yes, I said simply. There was no point elaborating. She gave me a sympathetic look that I was starting to recognize. The one people give to single Omega parents, full of pity and judgment in equal measure. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. Stress isn't good for the baby. as if I could just turn off stress like a faucet, as if every moment of every day wasn't filled with anxiety about money, housing, the future, and whether I was strong enough to do this alone. But I nodded and took my vitamin prescription and left, walking back through streets that were starting to feel less foreign. 4 months passed in a blur of exhaustion and survival. My body changed in ways that were both miraculous and terrifying. The morning sickness eventually faded, replaced by an appetite that seemed impossible to satisfy. My stomach grew rounder, a visible reminder of the secret I carried. I wore oversized hoodies constantly, not quite ready for the world to know, not quite ready to accept the reality myself. Walker was incredible throughout everything. He made sure I ate properly, reminded me to take my vitamins, and somehow managed to be encouraging without being overbearing. His girlfriend Maya started coming around more often too, bringing home-cooked meals and baby clothes from her sister's kids. Their kindness kept me afloat during moments when I felt like drowning. One evening I was working on my laptop, trying to finish an article about financial planning for a client who paid barely enough to make the hours worthwhile. Walker was scrolling through his phone on the other end of the couch, and suddenly his entire body went rigid. The change in his energy was so dramatic that I looked up immediately. "What's wrong?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Walker's face had gone pale and he was staring at his screen with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Ash, I don't know if I should show you this." My stomach dropped. "Just tell me." He hesitated, then slowly turned his phone toward me. The screen showed a social media post from Xander's account. In the photo he stood with a beautiful woman in a designer dress, both of them smiling at the camera. She wore an engagement ring that caught the light, sparkling with the kind of brilliance that only came from stones worth more than most people's annual salary. The caption read, "She said yes." Starting the next chapter with my incredible Sienna, the world tilted sideways. My vision tunneled, and for a moment I thought I might actually pass out. 4 months. We'd been divorced for 4 months, and he was already engaged to someone else. Sienna, the VP at his company, the woman he'd always claimed was just a colleague, the woman whose name had come up more and more frequently in our conversations before everything fell apart. Had he been cheating? The question came out flat, emotionless, because I couldn't afford to feel anything right then. If I let myself feel, I'd shatter completely. Walker looked miserable. "I don't know, man, but the timing is pretty suspicious." I took the phone from him and stared at the photo, forcing myself to really look. Xander appeared happy, genuinely happy in a way he hadn't been with me for months. Before our divorce, Sienna gazed at him with adoration, her hand possessively on his chest. They looked like the perfect couple, like they belonged together in a way that made my presence in Xander's life seem like it had been the aberration. "You need to move on from him," Walker said carefully. "I know that's easier said than done. But Ash, he's clearly moved on from you." But had he, or had Sienna been there all along, waiting in the wings while our marriage crumbled? The questions spiraled through my mind, each one more painful than the last. I handed the phone back to Walker, unable to look at that image anymore. My hand went automatically to my stomach where our baby, Xander's baby, was growing steadily larger. "I am moving on," I lied. "I have been. This doesn't change anything." Except it did. It changed everything. Because somewhere deep down, despite all logic and self-preservation, I'd harbored a tiny hope that maybe Xander would realize his mistake, that maybe he'd come looking for me, apologize, beg for another chance. Seeing him engaged to someone else killed that hope more effectively than the divorce papers ever had. The next morning, I had a routine checkup at the clinic. The doctor did an ultrasound, and for the first time, the baby on the screen looked less like a blob and more like an actual tiny human. I could see the profile, the little hands and feet. The doctor pointed out the heartbeat, strong and steady, and I felt tears sliding down my temples before I even realized I was crying. "Everything looks perfect," the doctor assured me. "Baby is measuring right on track. Do you want to know the sex?" "Not yet," I said. Knowing felt too real, too permanent. As long as it was just the baby, I could maintain some emotional distance. Once I knew if it was a boy or girl, once I started picking names and imagining a future, it would become impossible to protect my heart. Leaving the clinic, I decided to stop at the grocery store. We were out of basic supplies, and I could at least contribute that much to the household. I pulled my hoodie up over my head and kept my eyes down, navigating the aisles with practiced efficiency. I just wanted to get in and out without seeing anyone I knew. But of course the universe had other plans. I was in the cereal aisle, debating between generic and name brand options, when I heard a laugh that made my blood run cold. That laugh, I'd know it anywhere. I'd heard it 1,000 times, had loved making him laugh, had fallen asleep to the memory of it on lonely nights. Slowly dreading what I'd see, I peered around the corner of the aisle. There they were, Xander and Sienna, shopping together like a normal couple, looking at pasta sauce options and debating flavors. She was beautiful in person, even more so than in photos, tall, confident, polished in a way I'd never quite managed. Xander said something that made her laugh again, and she leaned into him naturally, comfortably, like they'd been together for years instead of months. I should have left. I should have abandoned my cart and fled before they noticed me. But I couldn't move, frozen in place like some pathetic ghost haunting the life I used to have. I watched as Xander grabbed a jar of marinara sauce, the same brand he'd always bought when we were together, the one he claimed his mother used to make when he was a kid. He was building a new life with new traditions with someone new. And somehow that small detail, that familiar sauce jar, hurt worse than anything else. Then Sienna's eyes found mine. I saw the recognition flash across her face, followed quickly by something that might have been discomfort or satisfaction, I couldn't tell which. She whispered something to Xander and he turned. Our gazes locked across the grocery store, and time seemed to stop. I saw surprise in his eyes, then something more complicated. Maybe regret, maybe curiosity. His gaze traveled from my face downward, and I realized with horror that my hoodie had ridden up slightly, exposing the curve of my pregnant belly. His eyes widened fractionally and I saw his mouth open like he was about to speak. I didn't wait to hear what he'd say. I turned and walked away as quickly as I could without running, abandoning my cart in the middle of the aisle. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. Behind me I heard Xander call my name, but I kept walking, pushing through the exit doors and out into the parking lot. The cold air hit my face, and I gulped it down, trying to calm the panic attack I could feel building. He'd seen. After all these months of hiding, of protecting this secret, Xander had seen that I was pregnant. And now everything was about to change. The 2 weeks following the grocery store encounter passed in a haze of anxiety. I jumped at every unexpected sound, convinced that Xander would appear at any moment demanding answers. Walker noticed my increased nervousness, but didn't push for explanations beyond what I'd already told him. He just made sure I ate regularly and got enough rest, being the steady presence I desperately needed. Then one afternoon, Walker came home from work with a strange expression on his face. He set his briefcase down carefully, like he was buying time before speaking. Xander called my office today, he finally said, watching my reaction closely. He asked where you were living and how you were doing. My heart lurched painfully in my chest. What did you tell him? Nothing, Walker assured me quickly. I said I couldn't share that information without your permission. He sounded desperate, actually. Not angry or demanding, just desperate. I sank onto the couch, my hand automatically going to my stomach where the baby had started moving more actively in recent days. Why is he looking for me now? He has Sienna. He's engaged. What could he possibly want? Walker sat beside me, his expression thoughtful. Maybe seeing you changed something for him. Maybe he realized what he lost. It's too late for that, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't entirely true. My heart still belonged to Xander, despite everything. That was the problem with love. It didn't disappear just because it became inconvenient. 3 nights later I was alone in the apartment. Walker had taken Maya out for dinner, insisting that I'd be fine for a few hours and that I needed to stop treating myself like I was made of glass. I'd settled on the couch with my laptop trying to finish a particularly tedious article about tax preparation strategies, when the doorbell rang. I assumed Walker had forgotten his keys. I opened the door without checking the peephole, already forming a teasing comment about his forgetfulness. But the words died in my throat when I saw who was actually standing there. Xander looked exactly as I remembered, tall and imposing, with those piercing blue eyes that had always seen too much. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. He wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my current income, but he'd loosened his tie and unbuttoned his collar, giving him an uncharacteristically vulnerable appearance. "Hello, Ash," he said softly, and just hearing him say my name nearly undid me completely. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. "How did you find this place?" "I hired someone." He had the decency to look slightly ashamed. "Walker wouldn't tell me, so I had to take matters into my own hands. I needed to see you. You have no right to be here." I tried to sound firm, but my voice shook. I pulled my oversized cardigan tighter around myself, suddenly hyper-aware of the baby bump I'd been hiding for months. "We're divorced. You're engaged to someone else. There's nothing left to discuss." His jaw tightened. "The engagement was a mistake. Everything about the last few months has been a mistake." "Don't do this," I whispered. "Don't come here and say things like that. You made your choice, Xander. You chose to end our marriage. You chose Sienna. I chose wrong." He took a step closer and I caught his scent, that familiar combination of cedar and something uniquely him that had always made my omega instincts respond. "I thought I could move on. I thought if I just pushed hard enough I could forget you and what we had. But I can't. Ash, every day without you has been torture." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to break my heart and then come back when it's convenient for you, expecting me to just—" "I saw you," he interrupted, his eyes searching my face. "At the grocery store. I saw you and you looked different. Softer somehow. And the way you were standing, the way you move—" His gaze dropped briefly to where my hands were clutched around my cardigan. "Are you pregnant?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. I could lie. I could tell him it was none of his business. I could slam the door in his face and refuse to answer. But I was so tired of hiding, so exhausted from carrying this secret alone. "Yes," I finally admitted, my voice barely audible. The color drained from his face. Is the baby mine?" The question felt like a slap. "Of course it's yours. Who else would it be? We've been divorced for 4 months. Xander, not 4 years. I haven't exactly been out dating." He reached for me, but I stepped back, putting the doorframe between us. "Don't," I warned. "Don't touch me right now. How far along are you?" His voice cracked on the question. 5 months. I found out a week before you served me divorce papers. I was planning to tell you that night, actually, before you walked in and destroyed everything." Xander stumbled backward like I'd physically struck him. 5 months? You've been pregnant for 5 months and I didn't know? Ash, why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to stay out of obligation. The words burst out of me with surprising force. I didn't want you to feel trapped by a baby when you clearly didn't want to be married to me anymore. I didn't want our child growing up in a home filled with resentment and regret. You think I would have resented our baby? He looked genuinely horrified by the suggestion. "I think you would have resented me for using the baby to keep you." I wrapped my arms around myself protectively. "And I couldn't live with that. I'd rather raise this child alone than watch you hate me a little more every day." Xander dragged his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from every stressful moment of our marriage. "I could never hate you. That's the problem. I love you too much. It scared me, Ash. The intensity of what I felt for you, it made me feel out of control, so I pushed you away before you could leave me first." "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," I said flatly. "You destroyed our marriage because you were afraid? You made both of us miserable because you couldn't handle your own emotions?" "I know." His voice was thick with unshed tears. "I know it was stupid and cowardly and wrong. I know I hurt you in ways I can never take back. But I'm here now and I'm asking you, begging you to give me another chance. Let me be there for you and our baby. Let me prove that I can be the partner you deserve." I wanted to say yes. Every part of me wanted to open that door and let him back into my life. But I'd spent 5 months learning to survive without him. 5 months building a life that didn't depend on his presence or approval. Could I really risk that fragile independence for a man who'd already broken my heart once? "I don't know if I can trust you again," I admitted quietly. "You hurt me, Xander. You hurt me so badly that there were days I wasn't sure I'd survive it." "How I know you won't do it again?" "You don't," he said simply. "But I'm asking you to take that chance anyway. I'm asking you to believe that I've learned from my mistakes. Please, Ash, let me try. Before I could respond, my phone rang shrilly in my pocket. I pulled it out with shaking hands and saw Walker's name flashing on the screen. I need to take this, I told Xander, grateful for the interruption. Ash, you need to get to the hospital right now. Walker's voice was strained, panicked in a way I'd never heard before. I collapsed at the restaurant. Maya called an ambulance. They think it might be my heart. The world tilted sideways. I'm coming right now. Which hospital? As Walker gave me the details, I was already grabbing my coat and keys. When I ended the call, Xander was watching me with concern. What happened? My friend is in the hospital. I need to go. I pushed past him, my mind racing with worry for Walker. Let me drive you, Xander offered immediately. You're upset. You shouldn't be alone. I wanted to refuse, but the truth was I needed help, and he was offering it. Fine, but this doesn't change anything between us. I understand, he said quietly, and we rushed to his car together, two people bound by history and an uncertain future. The hospital waiting room was a sterile nightmare of fluorescent lights and anxiety. Xander sat beside me, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough that I could feel his presence. We'd been waiting for over an hour with no updates on Walker's condition, and the uncertainty was eating me alive. He'll be okay, Xander said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between us since we arrived. Walker is strong. You don't know that. I kept my eyes fixed on the double doors where they'd taken my best friend. You don't know anything about what the past few months have been like. Walker has been my rock through everything. If something happens to him, I couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of losing Walker was unbearable. He'd taken me in when I had nowhere else to go, supported me through the worst period of my life, never once making me feel like a burden. He was family in a way that transcended blood. Finally, a doctor emerged through those doors, and I jumped to my feet so quickly that I felt dizzy. Xander's hand shot out to steady me, and I was too worried to pull away. Are you here for Walker Chen? The doctor asked. Yes, I'm his emergency contact. Is he all right? The doctor's expression softened. He experienced a severe panic attack that mimicked cardiac symptoms. We've run tests and his heart is fine, but he's been under extreme stress. He mentioned financial worries and working excessive hours. He needs rest and possibly some counseling to manage his anxiety. Relief flooded through me so intensely that my knees nearly buckled. Can I see him? Of course. He's awake and asking for you. Walker looked small in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors that beeped rhythmically. His face brightened when he saw me, though exhaustion lined his features. Hey, you didn't have to rush over here. I'm fine, really. You collapsed at a restaurant, I said, pulling a chair close to his bed. That's not fine, Walker. Why didn't you tell me you were struggling? He looked away guiltily. I didn't want to add to your stress. You've got enough to deal with. That's not how friendship works. I took his hand. We're supposed to lean on each other, remember? You've been taking care of me for months. Let me return the favor. Walker's gaze shifted to Xander, who stood awkwardly near the door. So you two are talking again? It's complicated, I said, which was perhaps the understatement of the century. After staying with Walker until visiting hours ended and making him promise to follow the doctor's orders, Xander drove me back to the apartment. Rain had started falling during our hospital stay, turning the streets slick and reflective. Neither of us spoke during the drive, both lost in our own thoughts. When he pulled up outside Walker's building, he didn't immediately unlock the doors. You can't keep staying there, he said quietly. Walker needs to recover without worrying about you. And you're 5 months pregnant, working yourself to exhaustion to make rent on a place that isn't even yours. I'm managing, I said defensively. Are you really? He turned to face me fully. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're barely holding on. Come back to the mansion. There's plenty of space. You can have your own room, your own bathroom. No strings attached, I promise. Just let me help you. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse. Going back to that house meant confronting memories I'd worked hard to bury. It meant putting myself in close proximity to Xander when I was still so vulnerable to him. But it also meant security for my baby, proper nutrition, access to better health care. Could I really refuse that out of pride? If I agree, I said slowly, there have to be ground rules. This is temporary just until Walker recovers and I figure out my next steps. And we're not getting back together. We're just two people sharing space. Whatever you need, Xander agreed immediately. Your comfort and safety are what matter. That's how I found myself back in the mansion 2 hours later, standing in a guest room that overlooked the garden I used to tend. Xander had insisted on carrying my bags, then left me alone to settle in, respecting the boundaries I'd established. The room was beautiful, far nicer than anywhere I'd lived in months, but it felt strange being back in this house where so much had gone wrong. I was unpacking my meager belongings when there was a soft knock on the door. "Come in," I called, expecting Xander. Instead, a woman in her 50s entered, carrying fresh towels. "Mr. Xander asked me to make sure you had everything you need. I'm Margaret, the housekeeper. If you need anything at all, just let me know." After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the surreal turn my day had taken. This morning I'd been living in Walker's cramped apartment, convinced I'd never see Xander again. Now I was back in his home, pregnant with his child, trying to navigate an impossible situation. Over the next few days we fell into a careful routine. Xander left for work early and returned late, giving me space. We'd have dinner together, awkward, stilted meals where we discussed safe topics like the weather and current events. He never pushed for more, never demanded answers to the questions I knew he must have. He was giving me time and I appreciated that more than I could say. One evening he came home earlier than usual and found me in the library, curled up in the window seat with a book. "How are you feeling?" he asked, hovering in the doorway like he was afraid I might bolt if he came closer. "Tired," I admitted. "The baby has been active today. Lots of kicking." Something flickered across his face, longing maybe, or regret. Would you mind if I felt it? The baby moving?" I should have said no. I should have maintained the distance between us. But something in his expression broke through my defenses. "Okay," I whispered. Xander crossed the room slowly, kneeling beside the window seat. His hand trembled slightly as he placed it on my stomach, his touch gentle and reverent. We stayed like that for several minutes, waiting. Then the baby kicked, hard enough that Xander's eyes widened in wonder. "That's our child," he breathed. "That's really our baby." "Yes," I said softly, watching emotions play across his face. "That's our baby." He looked up at me, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you. I'm sorry you went through those first months alone. I missed so much and I can never get that time back." "No, you can't," I agreed. "But you're here now. That has to count for something." Xander rested his forehead against my stomach, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I ran my fingers through his hair without thinking, offering comfort despite everything. In that moment, all the anger and hurt that had sustained me for months began to crack, revealing the love that had never really died underneath. "I want to be a good father," he said, his voice muffled. "I want to be worthy of you both. Tell me how to fix this." "I don't know if you can," I admitted. "But maybe we can figure it out together." Living with Xander became easier as weeks passed, though the tension between us never fully disappeared. He was attentive without being overbearing, making sure I had everything I needed while respecting the boundaries I'd set. Slowly, carefully, we began talking about more than just surface-level topics. He told me about the work stress that had contributed to his emotional breakdown, about his fear of inadequacy and failure. I told him about the struggle of those lonely months, about the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was strong enough to do this alone. One evening, about 3 weeks after I'd moved back in, I woke from a nap to find Xander in the nursery. He'd spent the past week transforming a spare room into a space for the baby, painting walls a soft sage green and assembling furniture. Now he stood in the center of the room, holding a tiny onesie against his chest, his expression distant. "What are you thinking about?" I asked from the doorway. He startled slightly, then smiled sadly. "I'm thinking about all the things I almost missed. First kicks, ultrasounds, watching your body change as our baby grows. I threw all of that away because I was too scared to face my own feelings." I entered the room, running my hand along the crib rail he'd assembled. "Why were you so scared? What about our relationship terrified you so much that you had to destroy it?" Xander set the onesie down carefully before answering. "My parents had a terrible marriage. My father was cruel and my mother stayed because she felt trapped by obligation. I watched her slowly lose herself over the years. Watched love turn into resentment and bitterness. When I realized how much I loved you, how completely you'd become the center of my world, I panicked. I was terrified of becoming like my father, of trapping you in a marriage that would eventually make you hate me. So you left first, I said, understanding finally clicking into place. You pushed me away before I could leave you or grow to resent you. It sounds insane when you say it out loud, he admitted. But yes, I convinced myself I was protecting both of us. Instead, I just destroyed the best thing in my life. I moved closer to him, drawn by the raw honesty in his voice. You should have talked to me. We could have worked through your fears together. That's what marriage is supposed to be, facing the hard things as a team. I know that now. I've been in therapy trying to untangle all the damage from my childhood. It's not an excuse for what I did to you, but at least it's a starting point for me. He met my eyes. I want to be different, Ash. For you, for our baby, for myself, I want to be the man you deserved all along. The next morning brought my regular doctor's appointment. I'd been dreading telling Xander about it, knowing he'd want to come along. But when I mentioned it at breakfast, his face lit up with such hope that I couldn't refuse. I'd really like to be there, he said carefully. But only if you're comfortable with it. I don't want to push. The clinic visit was different with Xander present. The doctor seemed confused by our dynamic, obviously a couple but with a strange distance between us, but didn't comment. When she performed the ultrasound, Xander held my hand so tightly I thought my bones might crack. Would you like to know the sex? The doctor asked. I looked at Xander and we had one of those wordless conversations that used to be common during our marriage. Yes. We said in unison. Congratulations, you're having a boy. A boy. We were having a son. Xander made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and suddenly I was crying too, and we were clinging to each other like we hadn't in months. For that moment nothing else mattered. Not the divorce. Not Sienna. Not the pain we'd caused each other. There was only this us and our son and the overwhelming realization of what we'd created together. That evening, Xander made dinner while I rested on the couch, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the day. When he called me to the table, I found candles lit and a bouquet of my favorite flowers, peonies which were out of season and must have cost a fortune. What's all this? I asked, surprised. I wanted to do something special. To celebrate our son. He pulled out my chair, then served a meal he'd clearly spent hours preparing. And to ask you something important. My heart began to race. Xander, not that, he assured me quickly, seeming to read my panic. I'm not proposing. Not yet. I know I haven't earned that right back. But I want to ask if you'll let me be fully present for the rest of this pregnancy. Doctor's appointments, birthing classes, midnight cravings, all of it. I want to be your partner again, even if we're not together romantically. Why now? I asked. What changed? Seeing our son on that ultrasound screen made everything real in a way it hasn't been before. This isn't abstract anymore. There's an actual person who's going to depend on both of us. And I realized that whether or not you ever forgive me, whether or not we ever get back together, we're going to be in each other's lives forever because of him. I want us to find a way to be friends at least. Co-parents who don't hate each other. It was such a reasonable request, so much less than what part of me wanted him to ask for. Okay, I agreed. We can try that. Over the following weeks, true to his word, Xander became involved in every aspect of the pregnancy. He came to every appointment, took notes on what the doctor said, asked questions I wouldn't have thought to ask. He signed us up for birthing classes where we practiced breathing techniques and learned about labor stages. He installed a car seat and baby-proofed the entire mansion. He was present in a way he never had been during our marriage, and I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he really had changed. Then one night, 3 weeks before my due date, I went into early labor. Xander found me in the bathroom, gripping the counter as a contraction ripped through me. It's time, I gasped. The baby's coming. His face went pale but his voice stayed calm. Okay. I've got you. Let's get you to the hospital. The next 12 hours were a blur of pain and exhaustion. Xander never left my side, holding my hand through contractions, feeding me ice chips, encouraging me when I wanted to give up. When our son finally screaming and perfect, Xander cut the umbilical cord with trembling hands. He's beautiful, Xander whispered as the nurse placed our son on my chest. You're both so beautiful. I looked down at the tiny person we'd created, at his scrunched up face and waving fists, and felt something settle into place in my chest. We need to name him. I said. What about Levi? Xander suggested. It means joined in harmony. Levi, I repeated, testing the name. I love it. As I held our son and watched Xander trace gentle fingers over his tiny features, I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being angry. The hurt was still there, it would probably always be there, but it had transformed into something gentler. Understanding maybe, or the beginning of forgiveness. Thank you, Xander said softly, his eyes never leaving Levi's face. Thank you for giving me this chance, for letting me be here. I know I don't deserve it. You're his father, I said simply. He deserves to know you. And us? Xander looked at me finally. Is there any chance for us? I thought about everything we'd been through. All the pain and healing. All the ways we'd both changed. Maybe, I admitted, we'll take it slow, figure things out as we go. But Xander, if you hurt me again, if you run away when things get hard, there won't be another chance. This is it. I understand, he said, and I promise, I won't let you down again. As we sat there together, our son sleeping peacefully between us, I allowed myself to hope that maybe broken things could be mended after all.